For 23 years, Emery Vera lived in 3 rooms. Not because she was ill, not because she was dangerous. Because her family had decided, very early and very quietly, that the word broken was easier to manage than the truth of what she was. She believed them. For a long time, she believed almost everything they told her about herself. That is what happens when the only information you have about who you are comes from people who need you to stay small. Then came the night of the Pale Sovereign, a moon that returns once a generation and does not ask permission of anyone. Her body did what 23 years of instruction had not been able to prevent. She shifted for the first time. She ran. She saw the kingdom she had only ever heard through windows. And in the morning, she woke up in the center of it. The Alpha King arrived expecting a disturbance. He found her instead, barefoot on the cobblestones, white-haired, surrounded by the evidence of a night she could not fully remember. Her family arrived shortly after. They apologized for the inconvenience. They called her broken in front of everyone. He did not let them take her. She had never seen the market at dawn. She had heard it her whole life. Carts, vendors, the city waking up before the rest of the world caught up. And never once been allowed to see it. By the end of this story, she will. Chapter 1. The west wing of the Vera estate had its own silence. Not the silence of a house at rest, of banked fires and sleeping servants and the last candle burned down to nothing. This was a different kind, deliberate. The silence of a place that had been arranged to forget something was inside it. Emery had lived in that silence for as long as she could remember. She did not appear at dinners, not at festivals, not at seasonal ceremonies, not at the visits from neighboring packs that filled the main house with voices and candlelight, and the sound of people who belonged somewhere. When guests came, her name was not mentioned. She had understood this early, not from a single conversation, but from the accumulation of small instructions that had shaped her childhood, the way water shapes stone, quietly, over time, without ever announcing what it was doing. She had been 7 years old the first time a governess told her that walking through the main corridor made people uncomfortable. She had believed it. She had learned, eventually, to believe most things she was told about herself. Her rooms were 3, a bedroom, a study, and a narrow washroom with a window that faced a courtyard no one used. The courtyard had a single oak tree in it, and she had watched that tree for so many years that she knew it better than she knew most people. She knew which branch moved first in a western wind. She knew exactly how the light changed across its bark in the hour before dusk. She knew the way snow settled differently on the eastern side than the western, and she had spent one entire winter trying to understand why. That was what her life looked like, mostly, trying to understand things she could only see from a distance. The study was where she spent most of her time. The shelves covered 3 walls floor to ceiling, filled with whatever the household had decided she was permitted to read. Astronomy texts, mostly. Old cartographic records. 2 volumes of pack genealogy so outdated they named houses that had not existed in a century. And a collection of celestial charts that she had annotated so thoroughly in the margins that the original text was barely visible. She had taught herself to read star positions with the accuracy of a court astronomer. She had no one to tell. She was the kind of problem a family like hers preferred to solve through absence. She had known this for years. The night the Pale Sovereign rose, Emery was at her desk when she heard them. The voices came through the wall from her father's study, which shared a partition with her own. She had never told anyone that the partition was thinner than it appeared. She had learned a great deal through that wall over the years, more than her father would have permitted, and more than she always wished to know. She needs to be secured before the moon peaks. Her father's voice. Flat and certain, the way he spoke when a decision had already been made, and the conversation was merely procedure. A pause. Her aunt, then. The measured one. The one who always chose words as if they were being weighed before purchase. She has never shifted before. There is no evidence that tonight will be different. We have managed this for 23 years. I am not having this conversation in the morning after it goes wrong. We cannot afford the attention. Go and make sure the east door is latched. She will hear the bolt. Yes, she will. Emery set down her pen. She sat very still for a moment, listening to the silence that followed the voices. 23 years. He had said it the way someone says a number they have grown tired of carrying. Not with grief, not with guilt, but with the particular exhaustion of a man who had been managing a problem for a very long time and was ready, someday, to stop. The east door was the only exit from her rooms that did not require passing through the main corridor. She had used it perhaps 4 times in her life, always supervised, always brief, always returned. From outside, somewhere in the direction of the front courtyard, she heard the low sound of the household gathering. A festival. The servants had been speaking about it for days. The pale sovereign came rarely. Once a generation, someone had said, though she had not been told what it meant for wolves like her. She had been told very little about what she was, only what she was not. She pressed her hand flat against the desk. In the courtyard below, the oak tree caught the last of the evening light. And for a moment, looking down at her own hand against the dark wood, she was struck by how the same light made her skin look almost colorless. It always did. She had stopped noticing mostly. The paleness, the white of her hair where it fell across her wrist, the way she seemed in certain lights to belong to a different spectrum than everything around her. Her family had opinions about that too, though they rarely said them aloud. They did not need to. Her palm was warm, more than warm. There was something beneath the warmth that she did not have a word for. A pressure that started at the base of her wrist and moved upward, slow and insistent, like a tide coming in against a door it intended to open. Her breathing had changed without her noticing when, faster, shallower, pulling air as if there was not enough of it in the 3 rooms she had been given. She had felt something like this before, occasionally, in smaller ways. A restlessness in the hour before the full moon, a sensitivity in her skin that the household healer called nerves and her father called weakness, and she had learned to call nothing at all. But this was not that. This was her body deciding something her mind had not yet been consulted about. Something that did not ask. Something that had simply been waiting for the right night. The bolt hit the east door with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. She heard it. She stood up slowly. The candlelight on her desk seemed suddenly too yellow, too close, wrong in a way she could not name. She turned toward the window. The pale sovereign was rising above the roofline of the main house. She had charted it. She knew its schedule, its angle of ascent, the precise quality of its light, which was different from an ordinary full moon, cooler, more direct, less amber. She had marked its arrival in 3 separate notebooks over the past year, treating it with the same methodical attention she gave everything she could observe from behind glass. She was not prepared for what it did when it found her face. It was not pain. She would later try to call it pain, because pain was a language she understood, and this was not. It was more like recognition, like something outside her body seeing something inside it and saying, "There you are. We have been waiting." Her hands hit the windowsill. Her vision blurred at the edges, not from tears, but from something shifting behind her eyes, something trying to reorganize the world into a version it preferred. She gripped the sill. She told herself to stay, to be small, to be the version of herself that fit inside these 3 rooms and caused no one any trouble. Her hands were shaking. The latch gave. She was not aware of the distance to the courtyard below, or of the unlocked gate that one of the younger servants had forgotten to secure that evening, or of her feet hitting the cold ground. She was not aware of the exact moment the thing in her chest stopped asking and simply became. The pale sovereign looked down at a white wolf running. She did not look back. The wolf did not think in words. That was the first thing Emery understood, somewhere in the part of her mind that was still hers, that whatever she had become in the moment the latch gave, it did not carry language with it. No names, no instructions, no voice telling her to be careful or be small or consider what people would think when they saw her. There was only the ground and the cold and the dark and the extraordinary fact of being able to move through all 3 without asking permission. She ran, not away from anything, not toward anything. The wolf did not organize the world into origins and destinations the way a person did. It organized the world into textures, the packed dirt of the road giving way to wet grass, wet grass giving way to the softer ground of the tree line, the air changing character entirely once the forest closed around her. Warmer in there, slower, full of information she had no human vocabulary for. She ran until running became something else, until it became the only natural state, until the part of her that remembered 3 rooms and a bolted door and the sound of her father's voice grew very quiet and very distant, the way a lamp looks from the end of a long corridor. She did not know how many hours passed. The wolf did not track hours. What it tracked was the moon. The pale sovereign moved across the sky with the slow authority of something that had never needed to hurry. And the wolf moved beneath it, through fields and forest, and at some point in the deep middle of the night, through the outer edges of the capital itself, cobblestones under her paws, the smell of extinguished torches, the distant sound of celebration from somewhere near the center of the city where the festival was still burning itself out. She should not have gone toward the sound. She understood that, later, with the part of herself that understood things. The wolf had not found the sound alarming. The wolf had found it interesting. There were things that did not survive the interest of a white wolf moving through a city that had never seen one. A market stall. 2 wooden crates stacked outside a closed bakery. A length of rope strung between posts, hung with paper lanterns for the festival, which came down in a cascade of torn color. A cart, which did not fall but was pushed far enough from its position against the wall that, by morning, it would block the entrance to the eastern lane entirely. She did not remember doing any of it. She remembered the sounds, the particular crack of wood, the papery collapse of the lanterns, with the vague quality of something heard from another room. There, but not hers. What she remembered clearly was the sky changing. The pale sovereign did not set like an ordinary moon. It withdrew. That was the word that arrived in her later, when she had words again. It withdrew, pulling back something it had extended, and the thing it pulled back was the part of her that had known how to run. The return was not graceful. It was cold, and it was sudden, and it happened in stages that her body did not handle well. The cold arriving first, in her hands and her feet, which were bare and on cobblestones, and then the weight of herself returning all at once, which sent her down onto her knees before she had finished understanding that she was human again. The ground was very hard. She noticed the hardness with a clarity that seemed disproportionate to everything else, because everything else was fragmented. Where was she? What street? What city? Whose city? What had happened to her shoes? She put her hands flat against the cobblestones. She meant to push herself up. She did not push herself up. The last thing she was aware of before the darkness was the sound of the city beginning to wake around her. A door, somewhere, opening onto the street, and a voice saying something she could not quite parse. And then more voices. And then the quality of the air changed the way it does when a crowd begins to form around something it does not understand. She did not hear what they said about her. She was already gone. When the Alpha King arrived at the Eastern Lane that morning, he had been told 3 things. That there had been a disturbance near the festival grounds overnight. That damage had been found across 4 blocks of the market district, and that a young woman had been found unconscious in the center of it. He had expected the first 2. The third one he had not. She was slight. That was the first thing he noticed, which was not what he had expected to notice. Slight and pale in a way that went beyond complexion, with white hair loose around her face and bare feet that were red from the cold, and on closer inspection, cut in 2 places from the cobblestones. Someone had put a cloak around her shoulders. One of the city watch, probably, because it was too large for her by considerable margin, and she had not moved enough to adjust it. She looked nothing like a threat. She looked like someone who had fallen from a very long height and had not yet woken up enough to understand where she had landed. Calyx crouched down. She was breathing steadily. Her color was poor, but not alarming. The cuts on her feet were superficial. Whatever had happened to her during the night, the damage visible on her was less than the damage visible on the street around her. And that discrepancy was the thing that kept his attention from moving on. He looked at the torn paper lanterns, the displaced cart, the split crates. Then he looked at her again. The damage did not match the girl. The street suggested disturbance. Something large, something fast, something that had moved through here with no particular interest in what it knocked aside. The figure on the cobblestone suggested something else entirely. He could not yet say what. The two things did not fit together into any shape he recognized, and Calix Hazelwood had learned, over many years of ruling, to pay close attention to things that did not fit. He stayed crouched. He waited for her to open her eyes. She came back to herself in pieces, cold first, then the hardness of the ground beneath her, which she had already registered before losing consciousness, but which presented itself again now as if for the first time. Then sound. Voices, more than a few, at a distance that suggested crowd rather than conversation. Then light, which was the wrong kind, pale and flat, and coming from the wrong angle, which meant it was morning, which meant she had been outside all night, which meant... She opened her eyes. The sky above her was the gray-white of early winter morning, and there was a man crouched at the edge of her vision. She did not move, neither did he. He was watching her with the focused stillness of someone who had been waiting for exactly this, not impatiently, not with urgency, but with the quality of attention that belongs to people who have learned that the most important information arrives when you stop trying to collect it. She could not make out his face clearly. The light was behind him. Take your time. She did not know why that made her throat close. No one had ever said that to her before. Every instruction she had ever been given had carried an implicit deadline. Be quieter, be smaller, be less, and do it now, before someone notices. Take your time was not a phrase her life had contained. She pushed herself upright slowly. The cloak around her shoulders, not hers, too large, smelling faintly of cold air and someone else's morning, shifted and nearly slid off. She caught it. The eastern lane came into focus around her. The crowd was larger than the voices had suggested. 30 people, perhaps more, arranged in the loose semicircle that forms when people want to see something, but are not certain they should approach it. Market vendors, a pair of city watch in their gray coats, several people still wearing the colored sashes of last night's festival, which gave the gathering the strange quality of a celebration that had forgotten to end. She looked at what she had done to the lane. The cart, the lanterns, the split crates outside the bakery, which a woman in an apron was currently standing beside with her arms folded, and an expression that communicated, clearly and without words, that she intended to speak to someone responsible. Emery looked at all of it. She looked at her own hands, which were pale and slightly scraped and entirely human. She pulled the cloak tighter. The man had straightened up while she was taking in the damage. She turned back to him. He was taller than she had registered from the ground. Broad across the shoulders, in the way that comes from years of carrying responsibility rather than years of performing strength. Dark hair, controlled expression, and the kind of stillness that does not require effort. It simply is, the way certain rooms are cold regardless of the fire. He wore no crown, but there was something about the way the crowd had arranged itself around him that told her everything the crown would have. She thought, I have destroyed part of his city. She thought, I have no shoes. The second thought arrived with a clarity that surprised her. Not shame exactly, but the particular exposure of someone who has just realized they are standing in public, missing something important, and cannot remember how that happened. He noticed her looking at her feet. He said nothing about it. Can you tell me your name? Not unkind, not official either. Not the voice of someone beginning a formal proceeding. Simply a question asked by a man who wanted an answer and had decided the direct route was the most respectful one. She opened her mouth. And then she heard her father's voice from the edge of the crowd. There she is. She did not turn immediately. She had learned over many years to give herself one moment before she turned toward that voice. One moment in which she was still whoever she had been the second before she heard it. Before the version of herself she became in his presence reassembled itself out of habit. She used the moment. Then she turned. Her father moved through the crowd with the ease of a man accustomed to people stepping aside for him. Behind him came her aunt, and behind her aunt came two household staff, whose presence communicated, more clearly than anything her father would say, that he had come prepared to manage a situation. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, not with cruelty, which would have required a kind of investment he did not make, but with the brisk assessment of a man cataloging damage. His eyes moved from her face to the cloak to her feet, to the lane around her, and the order in which they moved told her exactly how he was organizing what he saw. Problem, exposure, cost. He turned to the Alpha King first, not to her. Your Grace, I must apologize for this. She has difficulty sometimes with the moon. We do our best to manage it, but last night she got away from us. We will take her home immediately. She will not trouble you further. Got away from us, like something that belonged in an enclosure. She has not answered my question. Calix's voice, the same tone he had used with Emery, measured, direct, without performance. I would like to hear her do that before anything else happens. A beat of silence. Her father's expression did not change. But something behind it did. A small recalibration. The kind that happens when a man realizes the situation is not arranged the way he thought it was. He looked at Emery. Everyone looked at Emery. She was aware of the crowd, and the torn lanterns, and her bare feet on the cold cobblestones, and the cloak that was too large, and the distance between who she had been at her desk last night and whoever she was standing in this lane right now. She was aware that her father was waiting for her to apologize, or to defer, or to fold herself back into the shape he had brought with him. She was aware, also, that the Alpha King was simply waiting. She looked at Calix. Emery. My name is Emery Vera. Her father exhaled. A small sound, almost nothing. But she had spent 23 years listening through thin walls. She heard it. Emery. Calix said her name as if testing whether it fit the situation. It seemed to. Are you injured? My feet. Nothing else. Nothing. He nodded once. Then he looked at her father with the particular quality of attention he had given the displaced cart and the torn lanterns. The attention of a man cataloging things that did not fit together. She will be seen by the castle physician. And then I have some questions about last night that I expect she can help me answer. With respect, Your Grace, she is not well. She has never been well. She told me her name clearly enough. That will do for now. Her father went still. Her aunt looked at the ground. Emery looked at the Alpha King, who was not looking at her. He was looking at her father, with the patient certainty of someone who has already decided how the conversation ends and is simply waiting for the other person to arrive there. And she thought, with a clarity that felt almost dangerous, no one has ever done that before. Not in 23 years. Not once. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again by the person who originally held the key. Her family had kept her hidden for 23 years. It had taken one morning in a public square to make that impossible to continue. Before we continue, if you felt something in this first chapter that made you want to stay, please subscribe to the channel. It takes 1 second, and it means a lot to me. Chapter 2. She woke up in a castle. Not the West Wing. Not 3 rooms and a courtyard with 1 oak tree. A castle, with corridors she had not mapped yet, and a library on the 2nd floor, and a physician who did not ask questions, and a man who had, for reasons she did not yet understand, decided that what her family called broken was worth looking at more carefully. She did not know what to do with any of that. She started, as she always had, by paying attention. The castle physician was a woman of approximately 60, who examined Emery's feet with the focused efficiency of someone who had seen far worse and intended to say nothing about it either way. She cleaned the cuts, applied a salve that smelled of pine and something sharper underneath, and wrapped both feet in linen without once asking how they had gotten that way. Emery found this enormously relieving. The room she had been given to wait in was small but not sparse. A chair, a low table, a window that looked out onto an inner courtyard, where 2 guards were running a training exercise in the gray morning light. She sat with her wrapped feet on a footstool someone had produced without being asked, and watched the guards move through their patterns and tried to organize what had happened to her in the last 12 hours into something that resembled a coherent sequence of events. She could not entirely manage it. The night had too many gaps. What she had, instead of sequence, was a collection of sensory fragments: the cold of the cobblestones, the smell of the forest at the tree line, the sound of paper lanterns coming down, the way the moon had looked from somewhere lower to the ground than she had ever seen it before, the weight of herself returning at dawn, sudden and total, like a door swinging shut. And then the lane, the cart, her father's voice. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs. A servant appeared at the door, young, perhaps 16, with the careful expression of someone who had been given instructions and intended to follow them precisely. She carried a tray: bread, soft cheese, a cup of something warm that turned out to be spiced cider when Emery brought it close enough to smell. His Grace thought you might be hungry. Then, as if aware this required no response, she set the tray on the low table and left. Emery looked at the tray for a moment. She ate everything on it. She was reaching for the last piece of bread when she became aware that she was doing something she had not done in a very long time: eating, without calculating whether she was taking more than she was entitled to. The bread was there. She was hungry. The thought had not complicated itself beyond that. She set the bread down. Then she picked it up again and finished it. The guards in the courtyard had switched to a different exercise. Paired now, closer range, working something slow and technical that she did not have the vocabulary to name. She watched them anyway. She had always watched things she did not have the vocabulary for. It was, in the absence of other options, how she had learned most of what she knew. The door opened again. Not the servant this time. Calix Hazelwood was still in the clothes he had worn to the eastern lane. Practical, dark, without ornamentation. He had the look of a man who had been managing several things simultaneously since early morning, and had briefly set them aside to be here instead. He carried nothing. He left the door partially open behind him, which she registered without quite knowing why. He sat down across from her, not at the desk near the window, but in the other chair, closer, less formal, the choice of someone conducting a conversation rather than an inquiry. "How are your feet?" "Better." The physician did not ask what happened. "I told her not to." Emery looked at him. "Why?" "Because I wanted to hear it from you instead." He said it simply, without strategy behind it. Or if there was strategy, it was too well worn to show. "You do not have to tell me everything. But I have a city block with damage I need to account for. And I have a family that arrived this morning with a version of events that I found incomplete." Incomplete. Not wrong. Not impossible. Incomplete. She thought about that word for a moment. It was a careful word. It left room for her. "I do not remember most of it. The night. What do you remember?" "The moon. The sensation before the shift. Running. And then the morning." "Have you shifted before?" "No." He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of disbelief. The quiet of someone receiving information and placing it alongside other information to see what shape they make together. "Your family said you have difficulty with the moon, that this has happened before." "It has not. Not like this. There have been smaller things. Restlessness, sensitivity. Nothing my father could not attribute to nerves when it suited him." Something shifted in Calix's expression. Not dramatically. He was not a man who registered things dramatically. But the angle of his attention changed slightly, the way a compass needle adjusts when it finds north. "You have been in your family's estate your entire life?" "The west wing of it." He nodded slowly. "Is there somewhere you have wanted to go?" "Outside the estate." It was such a simple question that she almost did not answer it honestly. The honest answer felt too large for the room, too many years compressed into too few words. "The market. At dawn. I could hear it from the west windows on still mornings. The carts, the vendors setting up. I never saw it, only heard it. He said nothing for a moment. He simply looked at her the way he had looked at the Eastern Lane, attentive, unhurried, cataloging. Then he moved on, as if the information had been received and filed without ceremony. Is there someone you would like us to contact? Someone outside your family? She almost said no out of habit. The word was already formed, the automatic response to any offer that assumed she had resources her father had not pre-approved. Then she stopped. She thought about it as an actual question, which it apparently was. No, there is not. He nodded. He did not make it mean anything beyond what she had said. You will stay here until we understand what happened last night. There are rooms prepared. You are not confined to them. The castle is yours to move through as you like, within reason. A brief pause. I imagine after the West Wing, most of it will feel excessive. She looked at him. Is that a joke? Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but its immediate neighbor. A mild one. She had not been sure he was capable of it. She filed that away without knowing exactly what shelf to put it on. There is a library, second floor, east corridor. I am told it is extensive. He said it without weight, without emphasis. The way someone mentions a fact that is simply true and may or may not be relevant. She was at the door when she spoke again, surprising herself slightly. The word my father used this morning, when he told you she has difficulty. He was going to say something else first. He does that when the real word is one he has decided not to use in certain company. Calix turned back. He waited. I just thought you should know that the version he gave you was edited. He looked at her for a moment with that same quality of attention she had noticed in the lane. The attention of a man cataloging things that did not fit together. I know. He left the door open behind him when he went. She sat for a while in the quiet of the room, which was a different kind of quiet from the West Wing. Not the silence of a place arranged to forget something, but simply the silence of a place between one thing and the next. Outside, the guards had finished their exercise. The courtyard was empty. The gray morning light had shifted almost imperceptibly towards something that, in another hour, might become pale winter sun. She looked at the empty tray on the low table. She thought about the library on the second floor. She thought, East Corridor. She remembered it. She waited until the castle was quiet. Not entirely quiet. A place this size never went fully silent. There were always footsteps somewhere, the distant sound of a door, the particular creak of old stone settling into cold night air. But there was a quality of quiet that descended after a certain hour, when the corridors emptied and the torches burned lower, and the castle stopped performing itself and simply existed. She had been listening for that quality since she had retired to her rooms after the evening meal, sitting at the edge of the bed with her wrapped feet on the floor, waiting the way she had always waited, with patience that came not from virtue, but from long practice. When it arrived, she stood up and went to the door. The corridor outside was empty. Torchlight, stone, the faint smell of wood smoke from somewhere below. She stood in the doorway for a moment, one hand on the frame, the way she used to stand at the edge of the courtyard on the rare occasions she had been permitted outside, as if the body needed to confirm the space before the rest of her committed to entering it. Then she stepped out. She went slowly at first, less from caution than from the simple fact of newness. Everything here had a different texture from the West Wing. The stone underfoot was older, more worn, the kind of worn that comes from centuries of use rather than decades of neglect. The ceilings were higher, the proportions were different. She kept one hand near the wall without quite touching it, a habit left over from navigating her rooms in darkness on nights when lighting a candle felt like too much of an announcement. The east corridor was where he had said. Second floor. She found the library without difficulty, which surprised her slightly. She had expected a castle this size to be labyrinthine, to require learning, to resist her the way most things had. Instead, the layout had a logic to it, that she had been mapping since the physician's room that morning, the way the corridors oriented toward the inner courtyards, the pattern of the torch brackets, the slight downward grade of the floors that told you which direction led toward the outer walls. She understood spaces. She had spent her entire life in 3 rooms and learned every variable of them. A larger space was simply more variables. The library door was unlocked. She pushed it open and stood in the entrance for a moment, taking in the scale of it. It was not what she had imagined. She had imagined something like her study, ordered, functional. The books arranged by someone who knew where everything was and had no intention of explaining it. This was different. This was a room that had been added to over generations. Shelves built against shelves, reading tables positioned and repositioned until they had found arrangements that worked. Books stacked horizontally on top of vertical rows where the original shelving had run out of space. There were 3 windows, tall and dark at this hour, and a fireplace at the far end with the embers of an earlier fire still faintly orange. It smelled of old paper and dust, and something faintly resinous from the shelves themselves. She stepped inside. She did not know how long she stood there before she began to move through it. Long enough for her eyes to adjust to the lower light. Long enough to understand that the room was organized, not by a system she immediately recognized, but by one that existed, that had accumulated over time the way all real systems do, through use and correction, and the slow pressure of what the collection actually needed, rather than what someone had planned for it to need. She ran her fingers along a row of spines without pulling anything out. Cartographic surveys, administrative records from 3 reigns back, a set of bound correspondence that looked older than the correspondence in her family's estate by at least a century. She stopped, pulled out the correspondence. It was not what she was looking for. She was not yet sure what she was looking for, but the binding was unusual, the paper heavier than standard, and there was something in the way the pages had been assembled that suggested they had been gathered rather than produced. Collected from somewhere, not generated in one place. She carried it to the chair nearest the fireplace and sat down. She read for a long time. The correspondence was between 2 administrative figures from a reign she placed, by internal reference, approximately 90 years prior. Most of it was bureaucratic. Land surveys, boundary disputes, the kind of material that accumulates when a kingdom is being managed rather than governed. She moved through it quickly, the way she moved through anything whose structure she had already understood. And then, near the end of the 2nd volume, a letter that was different. It was shorter than the others, the same handwriting, the same period. But the tone had changed. It referred to something as a precedent and cited a record that the writer described as sealed. She read the relevant passage twice. Her finger stopped on the page. She read it a 3rd time. She had spent 23 years learning to read the shape of things through walls. She knew the difference between information that was missing, because no one had thought to record it, and information that was missing because someone had decided it should not be found. The letter did not say what had been sealed, or why, but the shape of the absence was unmistakable. This was the 2nd kind. She sat back. The embers in the fireplace had gone quieter while she had been reading. The library had not. She put the correspondence back exactly where she had found it. 3rd shelf from the left, 2nd section, between the cartographic surveys and a volume of Pack genealogy, and noted the location with the same automatic precision she applied to everything she intended to return to. Then she sat for a while longer in the chair by the dying fire, in a library that had not been arranged to forget she was inside it, and thought about what kinds of things get removed from records, not because they are wrong, but because they are inconvenient. Outside, somewhere in the castle, a clock marked the hour. She thought, I could stay here until morning. She thought, no one would come to tell me not to. She stayed another hour. Then she went back to her room, walking the corridor with more certainty than she had going out, her hand no longer near the wall. The archives were not in the library. Emery discovered this on her 2nd morning in the castle, when she asked one of the younger servants, the same girl who had brought the tray, where the administrative records were kept. The girl had looked briefly uncertain, then said she would find out, and returned 20 minutes later with the information that the castle archives were housed in a separate wing, accessible through the east corridor past the library, and that access required permission from the steward or from His Grace directly. Emery thanked her and went to find Calix. She did not think about this decision very much, which was itself unusual. In the West Wing, every request had required a calculation. The cost of asking weighed against the cost of not having. The probability of refusal weighed against the exposure of wanting. Here, she had simply decided she needed something and gone to find the person who could provide it. The walk across the castle felt shorter than it should have. She found him in a room off the main hall that appeared to function as a working office. Maps on one table, correspondence on another, a third table that seemed to be where things went when they had not yet been decided. He was standing at the correspondence table when she knocked on the open door, and he looked up without surprise, as if people appearing at his door was a condition of his life he had long since made peace with. "The archives. I would like access." He looked at her for a moment. "What are you looking for?" "I am not certain yet. I found a reference last night to a sealed record. Administrative correspondence, approximately 90 years old. The letter described the sealing as a correction rather than a security measure. I would like to understand what was corrected." Something in his expression shifted. The same adjustment she had noticed before, the compass finding north. "You were in the library last night. You said the castle was mine to move through." "I did." He said it without correction in it. He looked at her for a moment. "What kind of records are you looking for specifically?" "Beyond the sealed correspondence." She met his eyes. "Bloodline records, historical documentation of rare wolf phenotypes, and lunar event records, particularly documentation of the Pale Sovereign from previous cycles." A pause. Not long, but real. "That is a specific list, for someone who is not certain yet. I am certain about the questions, not about the answers. I shifted for the first time in 23 years on the night of a lunar event that returns once a generation. My wolf is white. My family has spent my entire life calling me broken. I would like to find out if those three things are unrelated. I do not think they are." The room was quiet for a moment. He was still, not the stillness of surprise, but of a man receiving information that reorganizes something he thought he already understood. She watched him revise something behind his eyes. Not his opinion of her exactly. The shape of what he thought this conversation was. "I will come with you." The archive room smelled of old paper and cold stone, and the particular mustiness of documents that have not been disturbed in a long time. The steward had produced the relevant keys with an expression of careful neutrality that suggested he had questions, and had decided, wisely, not to ask them. Calix had said almost nothing on the walk over. He was the kind of man, she was learning, who did not fill silence with noise. He left it alone, and let it be useful. They worked at opposite ends of the same table, which was the natural result of two people pursuing different threads of the same question. She had taken the bloodline records, older volumes, inconsistently indexed, the kind of archive that had grown by accumulation rather than design. He had taken the lunar event documentation, which was more orderly, kept by successive court astronomers across 3 reigns. She found the first real thing in the 3rd volume. It was not the sealed record itself, that she suspected would require more time and a more specific search. What she found was a reference in the margin of a bloodline survey, written in a different hand from the main text. 6 words, added at some point after the original document had been produced, in ink slightly more faded than the surrounding page. Sea Crown record, filed under correction. She read it twice. Then she set the volume flat on the table and looked at it for a moment. Calix. He came around the table without hurry. She pointed to the margin note without touching it. He leaned in. She was aware briefly of the proximity. The fact that they were looking at the same 6 words from a distance of perhaps 12 inches, close enough that she could see the slight crease between his brows as he read. He straightened up. That is the same language as your letter. Yes. Crown record, not administrative. That is a different classification entirely. It means whatever was not sealed by a department. It was sealed by order of the throne. The room was very quiet. That is either much more significant, or someone used official language for a minor internal matter. Possibly. But minor internal matters do not usually require a crown filing. and they do not usually get written into the margins of bloodline surveys. Someone thought it was important enough to cross-reference. They just did not want it to be easy to follow. He looked at her for a long moment, not the way he had looked at her in the Eastern Lane, cataloging discrepancies, but differently, something more deliberate, as if whatever category he had been using for her had turned out to be the wrong size, and he was in the process of selecting a better one. The Crown records are in a separate section. I will need to request access myself. They do not fall under general archive permissions. It may take a day or two. That is fine. I have more to read. She heard him move back to his side of the table. The quiet that followed was not uncomfortable. It had the quality of two people who have found, without discussing it, that they can work in the same space without requiring anything from each other. She thought briefly of the West Wing, of the silence that had been arranged to forget she was inside it, of 23 years of quiet that had never once felt like this. She turned the page and kept reading. The Crown record request came back the following morning with a notation that access required a formal review. 3 days, possibly 4, depending on the archivist's schedule and the condition of the physical files. Calix read the notation, set it on the correspondence table, and said nothing about it for several hours. Emery spent the morning in the archive room alone, working through a secondary set of bloodline records that she had identified the previous day as potentially overlapping with the period of the sealed correction. The work was slow and required a particular kind of attention. Not the attention of someone looking for something specific, but the attention of someone learning the grammar of a collection, understanding how it had been organized and by whom, and with what assumptions, so that the gaps would eventually become as legible as the text. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. She was beginning to understand, because she had spent most of her life reading situations rather than participating in them, observing from the West Wing, listening through the partition, learning to extract information from what was withheld as much as from what was offered. The irony was not lost on her that the skills her family's containment had produced were exactly the skills required to investigate it. She was on the 4th volume when Calix appeared in the doorway. "Walk with me. The files will keep." He took her through a part of the castle she had not yet reached, a covered walkway along the outer wall that looked down over the city below. The morning had cleared into something almost bright, the winter sun low and sharp, laying long shadows across the rooftops. She could see the market district from here. Even at this hour, with the stalls only half assembled, the Eastern Lane showed the particular organized motion of a place that woke before the rest of the city caught up to it. She had heard it from a window her entire life. She looked at it for a long time without saying anything. The Crown record review may take longer than 3 days. The archivist flagged it as sensitive. That is either bureaucratic caution or something more deliberate. I have not determined which yet. How will you determine it? By watching what happens when I push on it. If it moves, it is caution. If it does not, someone wants it to stay closed. She nodded. That tracked. It was the same logic she applied to the margins and annotations, the same principle of reading resistance as information. They stood in silence for a moment. Below, a cart moved through the Eastern Lane, the vendor calling something to someone across the street. The vendors. Calix said it almost to himself. And then, in a different register, lighter, as if something had surfaced from a different part of the conversation. You said you had heard the market from the west windows, that you had never seen it. She looked at him. You should see it before dawn sometime. A brief pause. Then he moved back to the Crown record review, as if the observation had been purely practical, a small item noted and filed. She did not follow him back immediately. It was such a small thing. She understood that, logistically, it was nothing, a minor observation, the kind of thing that cost him nothing and meant nothing in the scale of what they were doing here. And yet, something about the fact that he had kept it, had held that specific detail from a conversation about an archive request, and a physician and a tray of food. Something about that precise fact made the back of her throat close in a way she did not immediately know how to categorize. You remembered that. He glanced at her, then back at the city. Yes. She turned back to the rooftops below. I would like that. To see it. He nodded and continued with the Crown record. She followed him there. But she was aware, for the rest of the morning, of the particular quality of his attention. Not its weight or its direction, but simply the fact of it. The way she was aware of things she had no practice accounting for. The letter from her father arrived in the early afternoon. She did not see it first. She was back in the archive room when Calix appeared again, and something in the way he stood in the doorway was different from the morning. More deliberate, more contained, the way he looked when he was managing the space between a decision and its announcement. He set the letter on the table beside her current volume. She looked at it without touching it. She recognized the seal. He is requesting a formal audience, through official channels. He is describing your situation as a medical matter requiring family oversight. He is also suggesting that your continued presence here may be irregular. Irregular. She understood the weight of that word in the context of a formal letter. It was not a threat. It was the shape of a threat, submitted through proper channels, with the plausible deniability of administrative language. He is saying, I am a problem you have taken on unnecessarily. He is saying he has an interest in your welfare that supersedes the castle's, which is either true or the opposite of true, and he is counting on it being expensive for me to say so publicly. She looked at the letter. The seal. The careful handwriting she had seen her whole life on documents that governed what she was permitted to do. When did he request the audience? This morning, while we were on the walkway. She thought about that, the timing of it, the fact that he had sent the letter while she was standing in daylight looking at the market with the Alpha King beside her. She thought about how quickly news moved in a city, and how many people had been in the Eastern Lane 3 mornings ago, and whether her father had been waiting for the right moment, or simply for any moment at all. What will you tell him? Calix looked at her steadily. That depends on what you want. It was the second time in 4 days he had left a decision entirely in her hands. The first had been in the physician's room. Is there someone you would like us to contact? And she had answered from habit, quickly, without examining whether the habit was still serving her. She examined it now. I want to see the Crown record before he gets his audience. Then I will tell him the request is under review. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite the mild joke of 4 days ago, but its more serious cousin. That is also true. She looked at the letter one more time. Then she turned back to the volume she had been reading. I will need the lamp moved. The light in this corner is poor. He moved the lamp without comment. She heard him settle into the chair across the table, not leaving, not announcing why he was staying. Just staying. She turned the page and kept reading. The formal audience was granted 3 days later. Emery knew it was coming. She had watched the shape of it forming. The second letter from her father, more precise than the first, citing specific provisions about pack member welfare and family jurisdiction. The response from Calix's steward, which she had not been shown, but had inferred from the way the castle's schedule adjusted on the 4th morning. The particular quality of Calix's silence at breakfast that day, which was not uncomfortable, but was more deliberate than his usual silence, the silence of a man who had made a decision and was now simply moving toward it. She had spent the intervening days in the archive. The Crown record had come through on the 2nd morning. Quietly, without announcement, a single-bound volume placed on the archive table by the steward with the expression of a man who had been told to deliver something and intended to say nothing further about it. She had read it twice before Calix arrived. She had read the relevant section a 3rd time after he sat down across from her, and she turned the volume to face him without a word. The record was a correction, as the administrative letter had described. 91 years prior, a bloodline entry had been removed from the public registry by order of the Crown. Not destroyed, but reclassified. Moved from the general pack records into a sealed file that required royal access to retrieve. The entry concerned a family line that the record named only partially. Enough remained to identify the maternal lineage. Enough remained to understand why it had been sealed. White wolves were not anomalies. They were not defects. They were the rarest expression of a bloodline that had existed in the kingdom for centuries, documented, named, and deliberately obscured by a noble family that had decided, 3 generations ago that the association was inconvenient. Her family. She had sat with that for a long time after Calix arrived and read it. He had not said anything immediately, which she was grateful for. He had read the record in full, set it flat on the table, and then looked at her across the distance of it. They knew. Not a question. The original family head would have known. Whether that knowledge passed to your father directly or was reconstructed, I cannot say yet. He knew. She was certain of this the way she was certain of things she had read through walls, not from evidence she could produce in a formal setting, but from the particular texture of 23 years of specific instructions. The covered windows, the sealed wing, the word broken used not as insult, but as management. He knew what I was, and decided it was easier to keep me small. Calix said nothing. But something in his expression, in the controlled stillness of it, shifted into something she did not have a name for yet. Something that was not pity, and not anger, and not the administrative recalibration she had come to recognize in him. Something older than all of those. She had looked back at the record. I want to be there. For the audience. I want to be in the room. A pause. You will be. The audience was held in the main hall. Her father arrived with her aunt and 2 men she recognized as legal representatives of the Vera family. A configuration that told her the letter's language about family welfare had been a prelude, not a position. He had come prepared to argue a case. He saw her standing to the left of Calix's chair, and something moved through his expression. Not surprise, she thought, but the recalibration of a man who had expected a different arrangement and was rapidly adjusting. Calix had not told her where to stand. She had chosen the position herself. The audience began with her father presenting his case in the language of the formal letter. Concern for her welfare, family jurisdiction, the instability demonstrated by the events of the Pale Sovereign. He was precise and controlled, his voice carrying the particular authority of a man who had spent decades being listened to. He did not look at her while he spoke. She watched him. She had spent 23 years watching her father from angles where he could not see her watching, and she knew the precise cadence of this performance. The way he paused for emphasis, the way he reduced complexity to simple categories, the way he had of making the person being discussed feel like a subject rather than a participant. When he finished, Calix said her name. Emery. Just her name. The same way he had said it in the Eastern Lane. She understood what it meant. She stepped forward. Her father looked at her then, directly, for the first time since the Eastern Lane, and she saw something in his face that she had not expected. Not cruelty, not even contempt. Something closer to the expression of a man who has maintained a particular structure for a very long time and is watching it develop a crack he cannot locate. She had intended to speak carefully. She had spent 3 nights composing versions of what she might say, structured, methodical, the kind of argument that could survive scrutiny. Instead, she said the first true thing. You knew what I was. Not that I was broken, that I was not. You knew what the white wolf meant, and you decided the word broken was easier to manage than the truth. The room was very quiet. Her father's expression did not change, but his legal representatives exchanged a look that told her the argument had just shifted onto ground they had not prepared for. You kept me in 3 rooms for 23 years. You told me my body was wrong. You told me wanting the world was dangerous. You told me that when people saw me, they were uncomfortable. And I believed that. I believed most of what you told me about myself because I had no other information and because you were very consistent. She stopped, took a breath. Let the silence do what silence does. The Crown record disagrees with your assessment. I have read it, and I think the people in this room should know it exists. Her father opened his mouth. The record is available for review. Calix's voice, quiet, absolute. I had it retrieved 3 days ago. Anyone who wishes to examine it may do so. The legal representatives looked at each other again. Her aunt looked at the floor. Her father looked at Emery. She did not look away. She had spent 23 years learning to make herself small in that gaze, to find the edges of herself that were least visible and fold the rest away. She did not do that now. She simply looked back at him, the way she had looked at the oak tree through the courtyard window, steadily, with attention, without requiring it to be anything other than what it was. The crack widened. She watched it happen. The Vera family's jurisdiction over Emery's welfare is a matter I am prepared to address formally, given the contents of the Crown record and the manner in which she was presented to me in the Eastern Lane. I would recommend against pursuing that line of argument further. Her father said nothing. Emery stays. She is under my protection. Not as a ward. Not as a responsibility. As someone I have chosen to keep close, at my discretion, for reasons that are no longer anyone else's concern. It was not a declaration of love. She understood that clearly. It was something more immediate than that. A public repositioning, a reclassification, a door swung open in front of everyone present. She felt it land not in her chest, but lower, somewhere more physical, the way sudden certainty sometimes does. Her father looked at her one final time. Then he looked away first. Afterward, the hall emptied slowly. Her aunt left without speaking to her. The legal representatives gathered their papers. Her father walked out with the particular controlled gait of a man who had lost something and was not yet ready to know what. Emery stood where she was for a moment, until the room was nearly empty. Calix came to stand beside her. Not close, the correct distance for two people who have not yet named what exists between them. He looked at the empty doorway where her father had been. You did not wait for me. You said my name. I did. That was enough. I have been waiting for someone to say it like that my entire life. Like it was the beginning of something instead of the end. He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to look at her. Fully, the way he rarely did in public, without the half-degree of angle he usually maintained. She turned too. The market. Tomorrow morning. Before the city wakes. She looked at him. Something loosened in her chest. Not breaking, not collapsing, just releasing, the way a door does when the latch finally lifts after years of sticking. Yes. She did not say anything else. Neither did he. It was, she thought, exactly enough. The market at dawn is louder than she expected. She had imagined it as the sound from the west windows. Distant, organized, the particular rhythm of a place doing its work before the world arrived to watch. Up close it is different. Up close there is the smell of bread from somewhere to the left, and the sound of a vendor arguing cheerfully with someone about the weight of a bushel of something, and the way the light comes down the eastern lane at this hour, low and amber, and nothing like the pale sovereign. Nothing like the moon that started all of this. She stands at the edge of it and takes it in. Calix is beside her, a half step back, close enough to be present, far enough to give the moment its proper dimensions. He is, she has learned, very good at that, at understanding which things require his presence and which require his absence and which require something in between, which is a harder thing to know and a rarer thing to practice. She takes a step forward into the lane. A vendor glances up at her, white hair, unfamiliar face, early morning, and nods the way people nod at strangers in a market, which is to say briefly and without much interest, and then returns to the arrangement of whatever he is selling. She is not a spectacle here. She is not a secret. She is simply a person who arrived at the market before the city finished waking, which is a thing that people do, which is a thing she is now one of the people who does. She walks a little further. The cobblestones are the same cobblestones as the eastern lane, the same stone she woke up on, the same city, and they feel different underfoot than she expected. More ordinary, more hers. She pauses at a stall selling early winter produce, turnips, the last of the autumn apples, something she does not have a name for that is green and round and stacked in careful rows. She looks at it all for a moment. She does not buy anything. She just looks. Calix says nothing. He is very good at that too. She never told me whether she cried that morning. I do not think she did. She does not seem like someone who would. I think she just stood there in the eastern lane with the amber light coming down and the vendor arguing about his bushels and the smell of bread from somewhere. And she let it be exactly what it was. The world at last, at the right size for her to walk through it. That is the part of the story I always return to. Not the crown record, not the audience, not even what he said in the hall. The market at dawn, a woman standing in it, nobody telling her to leave. Thank you so much for being here until the very end. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from. There is something wonderful about knowing that this story found its way to you, wherever you are. If you would like to stay for the next one, the subscribe button is right there. There is more coming, and I think you will want to be here when it arrives. With love, Evelyn.